I'm a scientist and a writer. I'm the author of 7 novels and a few dozen short stories. What am I excited about? My wife and I are going on vacation to Costa Rica in a couple of weeks. So.
Think you'll get back in?
We've had a conversation about that.
Yeah, we had the same exact conversation since I was.
Yeah.
I'm glad you made it back.
Actually, it was really easy. They didn't like look at my green card twice. They're just like, okay, fine, go.
All right, let's start off with a question about found family. So what is your definition of found family, or what word do you use to define it?
I'll tell you. Well, I mean,
We all do.
oh, sure. I mean, your blood family is essentially, you've all heard them say, that's the people you're stuck with. That's who you expect to have your back, even though they might not. But your found family, that's the people you choose. So that's the people you hang with because you want to be and they want to be with you and they accept you and they don't have to like your mom does.
Right, yeah. I once read a definition that said that 95% of all, I think that's a made-up statistic, but 95% of all television series are about the construction of a found family. And I was like, no, they're not. Oh, wait,
Yeah.
maybe they are. Yes, they are. I mean, it's your work family. It's your, like The Office, it's your work family. It's your dinosaur fighting family, like in Primeval. It's your new family that you have constructed, and the construction of that family is the basis of all TV. And I was like, I think that could very well be true.
I think
So-
it absolutely is true. Basically, yeah, found family to me is the group of people you sort of accrete around yourself as you go through life. Sometimes those are people on the internet whom you've never actually met and probably never will meet in real life. Sometimes they're people that you went to college with that you still have beers with every night. And like, it's because sometimes your real family, your blood family, either they're not there with you for whatever reason, or they don't understand you for whatever reason. So you find the people you actually do want to be around.
Going back to what Brian said, I think to me, I'm very interested in stories of people who are what I would consider a found family, even if they didn't choose each other.
Mm-hmm.
It's, to me, what I find really interesting, and I think this is, I guess, how I would define it, are the people who have that familiar bond, whether they chose it or not, because of circumstances.
Yes.
And sometimes they don't even like each other,
Oh, yeah.
but they're connected.
Mhm.
And I was really happy to hear our guest of honor, Darcy Little Badger, in her guest of honor remarks, mention Farscape, which is one of my favorite television shows, which is, I think, one of the best examples of found family, because it's people thrown together by circumstance who would not have chosen each other, but through a long series of misadventures sort of become this, they're just locked together.
Mhm.
And to me, that's what found family is.
Also see Red Dwarf for another
Oh,
example
yeah,
of
that's
that.
a great example.
These people
Yeah.
largely hate each other,
Yeah.
but they're also still they're a unit.
Yeah,
So they're
when
like your
somebody's
real
full
family.
on.
Yeah, so when somebody gets threatened, then they all fight together, even though mostly they kind of want to strangle each other.
And I liked what Vivian said about it could be in real life too, your college buddies or your whoever the people that you have that are not your, blood relatives. And I know I love the story of Drew Barrymore, who, at age 13 was in rehab because she had a hideous regular family who were determined to make money off of her since she had been a child star since age 3. And her agent said to her, "Your family is toxic. You need a new family. I will help you find a new family. And they will be a family who will be on your side, and that they will help you, and that you will be healthy and happy, and you can get rid of this toxic family." And I was like, that of course sounds like a plot, but in fact was a real story. And that's exactly what she did. She found people who would support her and love her for herself and not try to take advantage of her. And she's a functioning adult as a result of it. So but I think found families are something that the reason we like to write about them is because we experience them in real life, in our own lives.
So You mentioned a little bit ago about most of TV families being made up of found families. Why do you think that we don't write more about traditional families, blood families?
Well, if your family is happy, as Tolstoy said, all happy families are happy in the same way, then there's nothing to write about.
Yeah.
If your family is unhappy, why do you want them? Why do you want to write about them? So,
Unless
but people
they're
do. I mean,
Fantastic Four.
yeah, exactly. But realistic, what you call, I don't know what you call it now, mainstream fiction, realistic fiction, naturalistic fiction, whatever. That's all that's about.
Mhm.
That's almost all about my horrible family, my awful family. And it's their real family that, or their blood family that they're talking about. And so that has left, genre fiction free to, I think, explore all these other kinds of families. But I think that's one reason.
There's a couple examples of like a genre story that is focused on a fictitious family, like the original Thunderbirds TV show, which is the premise of this is that they're an international rescue organization and they're run by this family called the Tracys. They fly these futuristic aircraft all around the world to like save people who are being kidnapped by evil other people. It was from the 60s, so a lot of it was like inherently quite racist, but there's a lot to look at in there anyway and like see how they were telling stories based on these people. But you can't do that with a real family because they're boring.
That's true.
Not all the time.
Okay, all right, fine.
No, I have a story out in Electric Spec, and it's about a blood feud between two blood brothers and all the friction there. And one gets anointed king of the tequila empire, for instance. And he wasn't supposed to be. The older brother was supposed to be. And so it caused all this blood friction between the father and the two brothers. So, I mean, you can do it, but why isn't it done so often? I mean, I think it's more fun to be outcasts finding each other as opposed to these people you were born with.
I mean, I'm just speculating, but is there an issue? If you have like a literal family and you put them through the tribulations that would form a found family, is it more constraining because there are certain dynamics that are
Dad always liked you best.
Yeah, I mean, either dynamics that are sort of trite and boring or things you can't really do without squeaking out your audience, or is there just more freedom if you have people who start out as strangers and then you put them through the same set of circumstances?
Definitely.
Yeah, that could be. No, Anna the L.M. Montgomery, who wrote the Anne of Green Gables series, she talked about kindred spirits and that your job in life is to find your kindred spirits wherever you can. And I think she was talking about, found family types of people. And sometimes the people in your family are kindred spirits, but other times they're really not. And then you really need to go elsewhere to find kindred spirits and to not assume that your position in the family is your position in the world. I think one of my strongest objections to homeschooling is that families tend to slot you and they'll say, you're the smart one, you're the pretty one, you're the athletic one. And this may not be true at all. I mean, in other contexts, that just may not be true, but you're filling a particular position in the family and the family is not going to allow you to achieve any other position because that's your position. And then unless you get outside of that, you will never realize that, oh my God, you're the musical one, but you had no idea till you got away from your family. And so I think it's part of growing up too, which is figuring out who you really are. And of course, who we really are, obviously, is orphans that don't know their real parents. And their real parents are like the king and queen. And people would really appreciate us if they only knew who we really were. And that's, I think, what all stories are really about in some way.
So we've been talking about family and how finding kindred spirits. So what do you think makes us yearn to have a family and not just be on our own or individuals with no one around us?
Well, we are social creatures. We have a need to be with other people unless you are a sociopath. So there's that, and a need for acceptance. That's a big thing. And some people don't get that from their family, but you'll find your tribe and
Right.
get acceptance from your friends.
Right. And the feeling that you get, I can remember when I first went to college and I joined a youth group, and oh my God, I was like, these are my people. They got all my jokes.
Yes.
They recognized all my literary allusions. They had seen all the same movies I had seen. It was so cool. And there's no feeling like that when you really feel that you found your people. So, and it's surprising who your people are. Sometimes your people are your own generation, which is what I love about fiction, because in fiction your true kindred spirit can be 150 years old, or can be an alien creature, or what you thought was a pet, like in Heinlein's The Star Beast, in which by the end of the story you're really wondering, now who is the pet and who is the owner? Or it doesn't work both ways, and things like that. So science fiction gives you so much scope for finding kindred spirits in different shapes and forms that you would not necessarily have been able to look for in your own life.
So what aspects of found families make them effective in a story? We probably talked a little bit about this, but.
Yeah.
I would say the fact that each individual member of the found family has different skills and different things they're good at, different things they want to be doing. So whatever you're facing can be split up into tasks that each individual person is better equipped to perform, as opposed to everyone being like, well, I guess we're going to do this now. It's like, I can do this because I'm good at this particular thing. But having like that
Right.
variety
Yeah,
of
yeah.
like skill sets.
I think that's true.
Yeah.
I think that's very true. When I always have to mention my favorite television show of all time, Primeval, the British Primeval, not the American Primeval. But it was basically the A-team fighting dinosaurs kind of thing, And so it had the geeky kid, the tech kid, and it had the hunky guy, and it had the cute girl, and it had the professor, and then it had the government administrator. I mean, this is standard to all these team found family stories. And those are all stereotypes. And when the show started out, they were all stereotypes. But by the end of the show, nobody was fulfilling the role that they had originally started out as fulfilling. And the geeky kid was now the hero, and he was also the girl. He was in the romantic relationship. He was playing the part of the girl in movies. And it was, and the professor had to become an action hero, and the government administrator had to become a hero in her own right. And they each had their specific skills, but then being part of the team made them also develop other skills that they hadn't known that they had. And that was very cool to watch. So great show, 5 seasons. Highly recommend it. I'll be as I die, as I'm going down in the flaming wreckage of the plane, I'll be going,
You should watch this show.
watch Primeval.
Once a found family has been established, I love, both as a consumer of story and also, when I'm writing, I love like the way once characters have been through so much together and they have that bond, whether they want it or not, the way, as it would be in real life, there's there's like an emotional shorthand that these people share. And trying to get that across to the reader in a way that's natural, without having them say, well, as you know,
As
you know.
remember the time we were in that plane crash together,
Right,
and then there was the cannibalism, and then there was,
Right.
like that. I like the texture, that sort of unspoken texture between the characters. I think that is really, really fun to explore and receive as a storyteller.
Right. I agree.
People get that across.
Mhm.
I love that.
Yeah. Me too. I love that. Big Bang Theory started out as a series of jokes. I mean, they had science jokes, they had geeky SF jokes, they had gamer jokes, they had, Ren Fair jokes, it's just really a series of jokes, and totally stereotypical characters. The babe next door, the geeky guy who has the hopeless crush on the babe next door, the funny, funny characters that were his sidekicks, And there was no heart to any of those characters when they first started, which is okay. That's okay. Because over the course of the 12 years, they really all were allowed to develop as characters and then as a found family, so that by the end of the series, when they filmed the last episode about Sheldon getting the Nobel Prize, of course, everybody, it's not a spoiler. He said in episode 1 he was going to win the Nobel Prize. But it was, the audience was totally in tears. The cast was in tears. And you're like, how did you do that? How did you get from a series of jokes to genuinely loved characters and more real? They always say, well, the problem with society today is that the books we read and the games we play and the movies we watch are more real to us than our real relationship with someone. Like, I do not see this as a problem.
No.
Not at all. I think we expend our emotional feelings wherever we can. And we have it's possible to have these wonderful relationships with people we've never met, with people we've only seen as TV characters or as characters in a book. Or as Paul McCartney said one time, music is really just black marks on a page. How come it can make us cry? And I feel the same way about literature and movies and everything else. It is a way to express our humanness and to reach out. And so you can count among your friends whoever you want. You can count the Primeval team or the Big Bang Theory team or The Office or whoever, or your favorite characters in books, or Frodo. How many of you love Frodo and think of him as a part of your own family? You bet. So, and I think that's one of the blessings of literature, is that we get so emotionally attached to these people that are not real. I went on, I'm sorry to go on, but I was on a walking tour of Oxford. Okay. And the lady was really trying hard, and the audience, and it was all Americans, so they're morons, So she said, well, this is where, if you'll see this is where T.E. Lawrence of Arabia, anybody? Lawrence of Arabia? He went to school here. And then she was like, okay, and in this museum, you can see Albert Einstein's blackboard from the lecture that he gave here. Albert Einstein, anybody? Albert Einstein. And so then she comes to the Bridge of Sighs, and she says, and this is where Lord Peter Wimsey proposed to Harriet Vane. And the cameras came out, and everybody's clicking like mad.
Oh my God, yeah.
And I'm like, you do know that Lord Peter Wimsey and Harriet Vane are not real. Only they are real. They are real. And that was very obvious on that tour, that they were more real than many of the real people that we were talking about on the tour. And that's why I love writing, because it's more real than reality.
Wow, that's cool. More real, yeah. I can see that. There's more real than reality. The reality is boring.
It is.
Yeah.
Vivian, I had a question for you, kind of related to my last question. In your author bio online, you mentioned that found family is perhaps the most important thing you write about. Why does found family hold this place in your writing?
Possibly because it's really personal for me. I was born in Kenya. I am British. I have lived in the United States since 1987. I am not from anywhere. I don't anymore have a home country. I used to consider Britain, and I do theoretically still consider it my home country. That's where I'm from. That's where my passport is from. But it's no longer home to me the way it used to be when I was a kid, and we used to go back and visit everyone else in our family who weren't coming to America with us. So all of our family was there, and my parents and I were alone here. And I don't have a home anymore, and I don't really have a family because they're so far away and I see them so infrequently. So I basically made a group of people around me over the years who became a family. And some of those are teachers and mentors, some of those are classmates, some of those are fellow authors I've met. I met and married my wife due to fan fiction that I was writing for Star Wars. She has since won 2 Hugos, a Locus, and she lost the Nebula. But yeah, so family is a thing that I have created largely out of whole cloth for myself. And when I came to write novels in adulthood, because weirdly, like Darcy, I have a long, long history of writing as a small child. Like I started actually writing novels roughly, like novels on a computer when I was about 11. They were not very good novels and they were only about 20,000 words. But I was writing them and they were stories, 1, 2, 3. And they made sense. But the point being, I've always had the idea of bringing characters together and seeing how they bounce off each other and what that might mean for characters that exist within historical fiction that you borrow from that historical fiction and stick together in a situation and see what happens. That's the conceit behind my original trilogy, Strange Practice, Dreadful Company, and Grave Importance. It is how many characters from classic horror literature can I get into one story? It was the original National Novel Writing Month novel that became Strange Practice many years later. And it turned out way too many. It didn't work. So I took out most of them again, and I kept the core characters that I was interested in. And they developed beyond what I could ever have imagined possible. Like none of the stuff that happened in the second and third book was even in my radar when I began writing. It developed, and these people developed relationships with each other, and it grew and flowered. And I think that is something that I find important in my own life. So I tend to always end up writing about it, even if I don't mean to.
Mhm.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, wow.
Sorry, I go on.
Thank you. No, thank you. That was very interesting. Kind of goes into the next thing I was going to ask. So when you're writing a book or a story that includes a found family, who are you looking for and what kind of character interactions are important to include?
As Ian pointed out, it's good to have a little friction in there.
Oh, yeah.
And a wild
Yes.
card that
Yes.
might betray the whole family.
Yes.
But you can't let that loose. That's good to bury that and have that come out later at some point, you know. But yeah, there's got to be a little friction there, like a real family, but different. I mean, I think it hurts more if someone of your found family stabs you in the back than if an actual family member does it.
Totally.
It's true.
I think even sometimes just the story of people coming from, diametrically opposed characters coming together and finding an equilibrium can be very moving.
Oh, yeah.
And so sometimes the friction is just that they are, as I've said before, like people who would not choose each other and are forced to accommodate their differences and learn how to work together or learn how to be together. I think if the distance that the characters have to travel is very short, then I don't think that's a very interesting story. Right?
Yeah, I also think that that I always come at my characters from a very mechanical way that drives people crazy when they find out what I actually do. But they'll say, "How did you come up with the character of Colin in my Oxford?" That's the 12-year-old kid in the first book, and I'm like, "Well, I invented him because Mr. Dunworthy to talk to. And I needed somebody to do all the plot explication. And as Miss Piggy says, somebody has to do it. So, and if you have an adult asking questions, then they're either a moron or they're brand new. Otherwise, why are they asking these questions? They obviously know the answers, but kids don't know anything. So they ask lots and lots and lots of questions. And it doesn't seem phony when they ask these questions because they clearly don't have much experience of the world. So I picked a kid because he needed to. So how does time travel work? So how does the drop work? So why can't you get her out? Well, et cetera, et cetera. I needed him to ask all those questions. And then I needed to figure out a reason why he was there by himself so that Mr. Dunworthy could kind of adopt him during the course of the pandemic. And so I came up with a reason for that, and I gave him a little backstory. And then and then he was just standing around. This is like what happens in a play when you're standing around and you only have one line, but then they're like, well, we need somebody to carry the tray on in scene 2. And so then you get to carry the tray on, and then we also need somebody to do this in scene 3. And pretty soon you have a whole part, and that's kind of how I do my story. So Colin was standing around, and then he was doing all these other things. And then I found that he was kind of good for comic relief. So I started using him for that. And then I got him to interact with Mr. Finch. But he just started out as a totally mechanical character so he could ask all the questions that needed to be answered in the plot explication. And that doesn't sound very romantic. It doesn't sound like we like to think of writers being so creative and having this swell up out of the world, but that's how I do my characters.
Actually, there's a character in the second book who basically exists because I needed somebody to give a particular line at a particular time. And because the line was in Polari, which is the old-fashioned British gay slang that existed in the 60s and 70s, nobody knows it now except for in stuff like Velvet Goldmine. But it's hilarious, and it's also very specific to a time and place. And I needed this character to say this line, which meant that he had to be a certain sort of specific type, and
Right.
then he became an actual character.
Right.
And then I
turned
started
human.
shipping him with his other character,
I
and
know.
other people shipped him, and I was like, shit, okay, they're fine.
It's like Pinocchio. He starts out as a puppet and then he turns into a real boy.
Exactly.
I mean, it's just the most amazing process. It's really
Grisite
cool.
turned into a real boy.
Yeah, it's really cool.
He was fun to play, though.
Let's see. What, if any, kind of story arcs do you draw from when creating your found families? So like Island of Misfit Toys might be an example, or I don't know, opposite attract stories. Sorry, go ahead.
Trapped in a place.
Trapped in a place, trapped in a situation.
Yeah, trapped in a situation, and you sort of need each other. You don't know each other, but you need each other. And then you start to, things start to work out, and maybe you don't like each other that much, or maybe you start to really like each other. But you get through this thing you're trying to get through, or at least make it to the next step or something. And so maybe a bond is created because you've been through some danger, some whatever's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, trapped in a situation is really good. It's always helpful. Or a place, stranded on a planet, or stuck in a cellar with 8 other survivors, or whatever. I mean, any situation in which there's kind of a pressure cooker that you can, and they can't leave. And later they can leave, but by then they all love each other, so they don't leave.
I can't resist mentioning what is maybe a story of found enemies. I'm sorry, I go on about this all the time, but since Connie got to mention her favorite television show, I don't know if anyone here has seen the television show Yellow Jackets. Oh, my, you people. It is spectacular. But it is a bunch of people trapped together who start out as a team. And then it goes really, really wrong. But it's the same, it's what I talked about before, where they go through so much together, but it doesn't necessarily bring them together, but they still have that emotional shorthand.
Mhm.
But starting from the place that Brian mentioned of literally physically trapped together. Please watch Yellow Jackets, because I want to it really is spectacular.
Well, I think we should ask you guys, what are your favorite found family things that you have read about or watched? Or
The Scooby Gang from Buffy.
the Scooby Gang.
Mhm.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Leverage.
Oh, absolutely.
Also leverage.
Love.
What?
Six of Crows.
Mhm.
Right, the heist narrative is a great idea.
Right.
Six of
Oh,
Crows is
yes.
perfect
Yeah.
for that.
Yeah, what,
Some of the Ocean's
what-
movies.
and what
Mm.
Vivian was talking about, the specific skills that each person brings
Yes.
to it. The heist movie is wonderful, or heist plot is wonderful because you're hired because you're the person who's the locksmith, and you're the person who's the this, and then there's a person who you're really not sure why they're there, what their function is. And it's never and you're like, why do we have this person here? And then it turns out they know how to do this really interesting thing,
Mhm.
and they're totally useless for everything else, but that one thing they need to do. And that's always very satisfying to watch.
Pratchett does that a lot. In Hogfather,
Oh, yes.
The villain Tea Time has like gathered together all of these people for this sort of heist that he's doing. And the person who has the completely specific job is Mr. Brown, the locksmith.
Ah.
And he has his little box, and you don't question Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown knows what he's doing. I love that one.
And we'll do it at the right moment.
Exactly at the right moment. He will not be hurried,
Right,
like a
right.
wizard.
Right.
Firefly is really good.
Oh,
yeah.
Firefly, yes,
Firefly.
it's excellent, yes. Till they kill the Bosch.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I'm sorry, was that a spoiler?
No, no, I watch that movie over and over every single time I pass. I know it's coming and I still go,
Yeah. Yeah, no, Firefly is a really good example of I'm trying to remember what their backstory is. If they accidentally came together as fleeing,
Like, two of them were in a civil war that failed.
right?
And then they brought in other people based off of, we need like a pilot.
Oh.
And then they like
Right.
get rated by one of the people and they're like, we can kick their butt, but this guy's really good. You want to join us? And then they pay him more. So he turns on everybody else.
Yeah.
And then when the actual story starts, they bring in a priest who's traveling around, and then the doctor who is trying to save his sister who is experimented on.
Yeah, so they are a truly a found family, yeah.
Sounds like a
Yeah.
D&D band getting together.
Yeah, it does sound.
Well, I think it's a really good example, though, of how actually many of them are, like you said, the pilot, the priest, these are stereotypes, but then they breathe life into them, and then they become full-blown characters.
I was gonna say Vox Machina. Ooh, is
Yeah.
like also that's like literal D&D.
Yeah, yeah.
And
That's right.
they're characters who are like a bard and Christ, I don't even know the D&D types of character, but they're all of them, and you would think that they would really not get along, and they kind of hate each other, and they kind of don't. But it's great, and over this entire course of like the first season, you see them sort of not just coming together as a family and as a group and as a team, but actually beginning to explore beyond what they were originally set up to be and to
Mhm.
think.
Mhm.
It's a wonderful show.
It's hilarious.
It is so funny. So funny.
Yeah, I'd like to say, maybe this is a little off topic, but I'd like to say something about backstory, by the way. This is one of my pet peeves. I think there's way too much backstory out there, that people focus way too much, that you can, it's one way, we got it from naturalistic fiction, where it's, I was born, David Copperfield, goddamn David Copperfield. It's like, we don't need to start when you're born. But this whole, and there are all these websites online that are saying, how to make rounded characters, and you make a list. What's their favorite
Oh,
color?
God.
What was the name of their second grade teacher? All this stuff. And you're like, this is totally bogus. You don't need any of this. I think the best way to write is the theatrical way, which is the character comes on stage and says something. And by what they say and what they do and how they interact with the other characters, that's how you figure out what they are. And then if you need to know that they were an orphan and their father is going to show up at some point, then you can drop that into the conversation. But you don't need to know it all up front, and you don't a lot of times need to know much more. Like in Firefly, they just have sort of a bare minimum of background, and then we find out more about who's the strange, the one who's trying to help a sister. What's the
Simon.
sister's name?
River.
Yeah, River. Yeah, River. Yeah, we find out pretty much all her backstory, but not the day she arrives. And so I think there's, I would recommend to people, if they're starting writing, try not to do entire autobiographies before your story actually starts. Just have them come on stage, interact with each other, and then you'll figure out who they are by the way they interact. I don't know, does everybody disagree with that kind of
I totally
approach?
agree.
I partially agree.
If we go back to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and the Gothic novels, how you have the whole family history the first
I
half of the
know.
book, you know?
Kill me now.
That's a little much, yeah.
Yeah. So what part do you disagree with, Vivian?
I think for a lot of types of story and a lot of types of plot, it is absolutely like possible to have a character just show up and then figure out who they are by what they're doing, like as you go along. But in other types of story, you really do need to have at least an idea of like what someone is or what they're there to do before they walk on stage.
And how they got to where they
and how they
are.
got to, you don't have
Right.
to put it on screen.
Right.
This is the thing. I think it's crucial to do a lot of stuff that never actually makes it onto the page.
Absolutely.
Like there's so much research I did that you would never ever knew I even cracked those books open because it's not anywhere on screen. On the
That's what the appendixes are for.
God, I wish I had appendices. You have no idea. But yeah, I think you need some preparation, at least for some characters. But I do think that the spontaneity is like a really good way of figuring out where someone's going to go just by seeing like, okay, go.
Yeah.
So kind of with that whole idea, so things that never make it to the page, they make it to the page in a way, and at least in my opinion, kind of as I know that there's other things, you can write in a way that you know there's more, but it's not actually written there.
It's also the promise I try to make to my readers that they can trust me to not screw up the research.
Right.
Like in Helios
Right.
syndrome, which is aviation, well, it's air crash investigation and practical necromancy. Like two great tastes that taste great together. But I had to do so much research on so many aspects of how, for example, air traffic control is managed between ATC centers. And like, at what point do you hand over from this center to that center? And how fast does a plane have to be going to cross this to there in this amount of time? And how much fuel would it have on board after having flown from Reagan all the way over to Nebraska? I had to find that out because if I didn't know it, then I would do it wrong.
Yeah.
And I hate being in a situation where somebody stands up and goes, well, actually, you screwed
Right.
this up. You
Right.
didn't do the research. I'm like, no.
And
I
trust
did
me,
do the
they will
research."
tell you.
Oh, they will tell you. Because I am that person. I hate being that person, but it's in my genes. And I really hate having someone be that person to me. So I
Right.
have to do all the research until I'm reasonably convinced that I'm not making hideous factual errors.
Right, but you don't put it all
It's not on the page. You would never
And
know.
we've all read those, especially, I think fantasy novels tend to be really guilty of this, high fantasy with and now we will have a
Spy novels, too.
48-page description of dying. I'm talking about weaving type dying in the Middle Ages. And we need to know. And
Supply chain management.
Dying, that might be kind of interesting to do 48 pages on dying, but not dyeing your cloth. And it's like, every page is screaming, I did all this research and by God,
I'm
you're going to
gonna
read
use
it.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is
And
my
Science fiction is
dissertation.
guilty of that too.
Oh, yeah,
You
that's
think of, like,
true.
the Red Mars series,
Oh,
you know,
yes,
so much
absolutely.
technical stuff in there. It's
Right.
Just
like,
don't need to.
is there a story?
Yeah. Where is it? Yeah. Right. That's true.
I had a-
Some of the Metal Doom books do that, from some of Frank Herbert's days, like God Emperor and those Doom books. They get real detailed oriented, and things are like,
Right.
Skip
Did we
these
need all that?
pages.
Is this
Yeah.
gonna be on the
These
test?
Pages.
Right.
Yeah.
So I had a question for you, Ian, that I was really wondering about. When you created Mab's family in the Alchemy War series, which is, a series of a robot family, how did you approach creating a family of clockwork simulacrum?
Gosh, that's a good question. How did I do it?
Thank you.
Well, I'm kind of, I mean, ironically, Connie used the term mechanical, and I refer to those creatures as mechanicals.
Mhm.
I am sort of mercenary in the way I create characters. Sometimes I'll say, okay, given all this, who would have the most interesting problem that they could try to affect? Or, what is a character that would make me laugh, in this situation? And so in the case of, in the case of Mab, and her Lost Boys, I was looking, because I knew I'm very mercenary, like I said, so I knew what purpose they were going to serve in the story. And so it was, I guess that's a case that maybe falls under what, you were asking us earlier. That is sort of where the island of misfit toys lives in the story. Very, very broken, extremely angry, extremely dangerous toys who sort of live on the edges of the story like boogeymen.
Let's see. When you write stories with found families, do you approach conflict differently than you would in other types of stories, like family stories or group stories, or one where it's a main character driven kind of story?
Conflict always has to be there, like conflict and tension is.
Yeah, it's
hard
different
to write a story
flavors,
without
but
that.
Yeah, you need
Yeah.
it. You need conflict and you need a comparison and contrast. If you don't have contrast, the story's going to be incredibly boring. So you have a contrast between like the type of conflict and the people who are dealing with it, or the type of characters in the situation. And the stronger that contrast is, at least to me, the more important and interesting the story is going to be. And also the more difficult it's going to be to make it actually land.
Right?
But it's worth it.
It's called painting yourself into a corner,
Totally.
and then you're like,
You're like, well,
oh, wait, I'd really like a happy ending here, but I think they're all gonna die. So
And sometimes you gotta walk it back. You're like, okay, never mind, that didn't happen.
So Brian, I have one for you too. I know you write a lot of short stories. How do you make a found family feel real in a shorter kind of story?
oh, it's gotta happen fast.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, the two people meet, they're already in trouble, or more people, or whatever, but usually I keep the character count for my short stories
Yes.
quite low. I
Yep.
mean, I think that's important.
Yep.
And to focus on one or two people, and especially the one person that you're hopefully rooting for. And yeah, like I said, we get them trapped in something right away. That'd be the hook. So you start there, and then they have to rely on each other, and then either they get out of it or they all die. So.
yeah. I can't remember who said it, but somebody said you should start the story at the end, but of course you can't start the story at the end. So you start the story as close to the end as you possibly can.
Yeah.
And yeah, and especially for I mean, that's true for novels, but it's true for short stories.
Yeah,
especially.
got 5,000 words to get it done.
Right,
So,
right,
yeah.
right.
Do you mean that in terms of like actually starting writing at the end, or like plan your writing to work backwards from the end?
That the action of the story, like we don't, once upon a time these people met each other. No, you don't start there. You start, especially in a short story, you start, okay, they've met each other, they've already broken up, they can't stand the sight of each other, they haven't seen each other in 10 years, then they've met again, and then we're halfway through that conversation before we start the story. So we're not starting at the very, very, very beginning to lead, unless that's important. I mean, I always try to figure out, okay, where's the end point? And then what can I absolutely not do without? And then try to fit it all in. But there's not a lot of people, when I was in writers' workshops, the most common thing ever said was, I think your story starts on page 11 or page 19 or page
Totally had that
54. And it's
Like
because,
chapter 8.
and that's a natural part of the writing process because you don't know where your story starts. So you just write stuff, and then you just have to throw a lot of it out because the reader can figure out all the stuff that came before, or 2 lines of reference. I can't believe you're still the same jerk you were when I was married to you, is all you need to get to put you where you are. Like in the movie His Girl Friday, she is leaving on the train to get married to her new husband and leaving the newspaper business altogether. And she comes to tell her ex that she's doing it. So it doesn't start when she meets this other guy. It doesn't start when the first 2 get married and break up. It doesn't start any of those places. It starts at the last possible point. And that way, then the action is really jammed together in like 3 or 4 hours. And then they clearly thought really hard about where to start that story. So for maximum, like you said, contrast and violence. It's a very violent story, but a very fun story.
So I think I'm gonna turn it over to you guys to ask questions. Yes.
So I actually, I really like found family, and I wrote a short novel about an alien and an orphan. And something I found myself kind of struggling with as I wrote this dynamic was how slow is like a found family slow burn? Because it started pretty, you know, an orphan and then obviously an alien. You kind of know where the story's going to go. But I found myself feeling dissatisfied as I got towards the end and like the main conflict of the story I felt like had wrapped up, you know, but I still feel like there was more to say. And I wondered if it was a product of possibly me dragging out how long it took for them to become like a family unit. Can you say anything on like how slow or how fast these dynamics happening can affect the dynamics or like the natural feel of a found family?
Well, I know like in Heinlein's Star Beast, which is about a kid who has, a teenage boy who has adopted a pet, found an alien pet on a trip and brought him back. And it doesn't start with him finding the pet. It doesn't start with him bringing back the pet. It doesn't start with their developing their relationship at all. It starts on the day that it looks like the pet is going to be taken away from him. And that's where the action begins because they're trying to get the maximum, you know, conflict. And all that stuff is in there. How he found him, how they became friends, et cetera, et cetera. But it's all done in conversation, in references, in shorthand. You have lots of different techniques besides straight narrative to do your backstory.
Okay, so writing a story when I'm trying to write, sometimes it can just feel really cliche. And I'm just like, I'm not getting any feeling from these people. So how do you turn like a relationship or like, how do you balance out a relationship so it doesn't really feel Disney princess to more like realistic, like I love you, but you're kind of an idiot? Like, how do you do that?
That's a good character question, yeah.
That is a good question. Well, I would just like to say that every story idea I have ever had in my life, the initial story idea was incredibly trite and had been, because you're getting all your story ideas from like the books you've read and the TV shows you've watched and stuff, and they're all cliches. So, and that's not your fault. It's just, that's where you get your ideas. So then your job is to think, okay, but how can I make that unique? How can I look at that? So one thing with the, if you have the Disney princess, ideal situation, you could go, yeah, but how come the prince never has any personality at all? Or you could say, well, how come she's really not all that perfect? Or she really is all that perfect, and how annoying would that be to live with someone that perfect? I mean, you give it like a little twist, a quarter twist, and see if you can make your story, differently. So different from the other stories. So I had this story idea, which I had stolen from a soap opera in which Luke came back. They thought he was dead, and they were having his funeral at the disco. Don't ask. Like you do. And it was a soap opera, okay? And he was really alive, and he came back to his own funeral, and I thought, they stole that from Huck Finn, or not Huck Finn, from Tom Sawyer, when Huck and Tom come back and they're alive and they watch their own funeral. And then I thought, well, if they can steal it, I can steal it. And then I was like, but nobody wants to read that story because we've already read it.
Oh no, we want to read it again.
Well, it's true, but I need to make it different. So then I was like, okay, how can I make this different? And then I thought, okay, so what if everybody thinks you're dead and they have your funeral and you come to your funeral and then your body washes up on shore? And I thought that would be really interesting. And then nobody would realize that you stole that idea. So
it's a twist on it.
But you put a twist on it. You try to figure out, or you try to think, what is wrong with the way this story is presented as it's always been presented? And what would it really feel like to be, courting a Disney princess? How would that be really? And find something new and different to tell.
Also, think about why you want to write that story. What about the story is interesting to you that makes you want to actually take it out of your head and put it onto the screen or the paper? Because there has to be something behind that spark, and if you can track that down.
Oh, that's really good advice.
Yeah, because I often have this question about things that I read, it's like, I'm not entirely sure why this was written. And that's not necessarily because it's badly written. It's because I'm not really vibing with the
Yeah,
story
you're
for
not
whatever
connecting with
reason.
it, yeah.
And that's fine, because not all stories are going to connect with all readers. But trying to work out for yourself why you're writing a story, I think, is sometimes helpful.
Yeah. And I know when I watched The Good Place, I loved that show because she's in heaven. She's died and she's gone to heaven. But she knows full well she doesn't deserve to be in heaven. And she thinks she's the only one. And then she discovers that other people feel the same way. What's very clear where that story came from, because we all feel like imposters sometimes. And we all feel like we're in situations that we do not deserve to be in. I mean, good situations that we don't deserve to be in at all. And that our main fear is that somebody will figure out that we're not the person that everybody thinks you are and stuff. And so that might be one way to approach it. But to think, how would I feel if I was in this situation is always a good way to approach it.
And on the character end, oops, am I overtaking you or?
Go ahead, Brian.
Oh, okay. Always remember that flawed characters are always much more interesting than ones that are
Right.
have their shit together.
Yes.
Right. Because they have no changes to make.
Uh-huh.
They don't need to make any changes.
Yeah, so give them a few faults. I mean,
Yeah.
use your friends as basis.
Yeah.
There's always some criticisms you've got about
There.
them, even though you still love them. But they may have some great faults to amplify in a character.
Right.
So,
That's true.
I was just going to add, when I find things are, sort of too simple or too concealed, sometimes it's because I'm on mental autopilot. And so I like to, and a great exercise is to go through and, take your first idea and throw it away. Take your second idea and throw it away. Take your third idea and throw it away. Around idea 4 or 5 is where you start to get the more crunchy,
Right.
interesting things.
Right.
Yeah, and sometimes it takes a little bit of work, but it becomes sort of automatic. After a while, you don't even articulate to yourself those first 3 really simple ones, and then you get into the meat of things. And sometimes you can really surprise yourself with what you come up with, and you say, "Oh, that's what the story is."
So like writing a list, maybe perhaps why the story would be interesting and just kind of seeing where your mind goes with it, and then kind of really being like, you know what, I like these 2. Or these 2 really feel like the resonate.
Or even within a scene, how does the scene evolve, right? Like you could combine it with what Vivian was saying, but even within a scene, this seems too Disney princess, this is too simple. Why? What could happen in this scene? Presented with this situation, how would this character react? Well, they could do this, they could do this. Oh, or they could do this.
They did this completely different
this
thing.
is the story.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there was a man who was like, how would I feel if I was being led to the guillotine? And you always think, you're going to be either scared to death or you're going to be Sidney Carton and you're like, a far, far better thing I do, et cetera. But really, one guy said he was sentenced to death, and he said, all I could think about was that his shoelaces were untied and he was going to trip over his shoelaces and fall down. You're like, how could you think about that at a time like this? But that's what you think about.
Clear.
But that's because that's the kind of thing you think about in a
Yes.
situation like that. So whenever you can catch yourself thinking something that other people would not think you would think in that situation, I cannot believe I wore these shoes to be kidnapped by aliens. That's the kind of thing that people think about. And that injects a sense of reality into your story that wouldn't otherwise be there and stuff. So your princess with that really bad hair day might work.
We got a couple more minutes. That's someone else. Oh, there we go.
So I'm gonna ask might be kind of hard. We all love tropes, and found family is like my absolute favorite trope. But I think it's also fun, and as authors, we should also remember to make them fresh and new in some way.
Mhm.
So what ways do y'all think about, or have y'all seen that effectively undercut the found family trope to make it fresh and exciting? So I think Ian had a really good example with Yellow Jackets, because it's not really it's more like the implosion of a found family. I've seen the first episode.
Thank you. It's a banger, isn't it?
H.G. Perry's The Scholar in the Last Fairy Door came out last year, and that one also did something similar. So I'm curious about what other ways y'all have found to make the found family trope exciting and not be so like repetitive. Since 95% of TV is made by found family.
Can I mention Primeval again?
Absolutely. Connie.
So in Primeval, as I said, we started out with the geeky kid, the pretty girl, the hunky guy, and the professor, and then the administrator. Well, when they first started, the plan was to have the girl get together with the hunky guy, okay? And then like 3 episodes in, they had a scene where the geeky kid and the pretty girl are together, and and they think they're facing a dinosaur, and they're not, but it's kind of a shared, scary moment. And he puts the moves on her and then realizes that she really likes the hunky guy. And the look on his face was sufficient to make the writers change the entire course of the series. Because they were like, oh my God. And they got all these letters, they got all these emails going, you can't have her get together with the hunky guy. You have to have her get together with him. But he was totally unsuited to the task. So then they were like, okay, now what do we do? And the way they flipped the script was throughout the show, when I said he was the girl, that was the position. He was always having to be rescued. He never knew how to do anything. She became more and more kick-ass as the show went on, because she needed to rescue him all the time. He was the one who was fumbling with his gun, and it accidentally went off. And I mean, he did all the girl things. I think he even at one point lost his shoe, which is a classic, girl thing to do. And they just had all this fun playing with the stereotypes of the girl's position in that kind of show, and then gave it to the guy, and then gave her the other things and to do. And it was great. It was new, and it was different. And I think it made a difference. And I think that's like, you look at it slightly differently. You don't just go with your first thought, which was what those writers did. They went with their first thought. Okay, we're going to have an A-team fighting dinosaurs, and went with that. And then decided to make it more interesting as they went along. So.
Those bonds of found family don't go away. If, like I said, characters don't necessarily like each other, and they've chosen each other, but they go through enough that they have these bonds that are sort of ineradicable. And then, I like to play with what happens if one of those people does something absolutely unforgivable. Because those people are still yoked to that person. And then how do they react to that?
Ted Lasso.
Yeah.
Nate in Ted Lasso. Yeah. If you haven't seen Ted Lasso, great show, and has a betrayal halfway through that is just stunning.
It's wrenching.
Yes, it is wrenching and really fascinating, and drives the whole rest of the series, basically. Yeah, really, really great. So, and not what you'd expect. That was not where I thought they were going at all.
No, I
Yeah,
didn't.
yeah.
Didn't see it.
Yeah.
Well, we are at time, so I want to thank everybody on our panel for all their great answers. The next session starts at 4:10, so there's a chance to get some food and drink and some snack and pick out your next.
Anybody have the list of?
Moderator.
Yes, thank you. Great job.
Good moderating.
Thank you.
I don't have a program.
Oh, wait, I don't have to move, do
Yeah,
I?
I don't either.
I love
Do you have a program yet?
I don't know about